for comment. I think they still need. Get started. If you haven't, please help yourself to coffee and water and snacks over there. Just a couple of introductory notes here, I guess. So just you're all aware, we are recording today's session. It's being live streamed and will also be available as a video online after the fact on our YouTube channel. Just so you guys know, none of you are on screen. It's just going to record the screen and myself, but you will be picked up in audio. So we get to Q&A. That will be part of that stream as well. Just so that everybody's aware of that. No problem. My name is Garth Sturtevant. I'm the senior planner with the Municipality of Chester, and again, thank you all for coming today to talk about the secondary planning strategy and land use bylaw. We have a number of staff here as well, so we've got Jen in front of the video equipment. Darlene's taking notes for us, recording over there. And, the development so as well. So there's a lot of material here. I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly, and then but what I will say is that when we're done with the presentation, we will stay basically as long as the folks want to do Q&A, and that can either be in a group or we can do one-on-one. We also have some maps at the back, so if there's, if you want to afterwards go have a look at those or individual talk, we can do that as well. And then finally, before we jump in here, I will just say that everything you're going to see today is still a draft. That is the purpose of this, is to get information out there and get feedback and comments. We still absolutely have time to make changes. We've been working on this for a number of years, but until you have something to present, it's a lot harder to get specific feedback on what might be right, wrong, or doesn't quite hit the mark. So we felt we were ready to be at that point now, and so we're doing four meetings. This is exactly 4 public meetings that are scheduled. We'll go through sort of the next steps towards the end. So to jump right in. So a bit of background. So the plan review process began in 2020. That was
share your screen, please.
Oh, share this.
Sorry.
No. Okay. Yeah, so we began this process in 2020. That followed on the heels of a municipal plan review. So in the district of Chester, we have 2 separate planning documents. One deals with the village of Chester, that's what we're going to talk about today, and the other set deals with everything outside of the village boundary. So we did the outside review, which finished in 2020, and then we moved right into the current plan. Overall, it's intended to maintain a consistent style and approach with the municipal planning strategy in terms of the way sections are laid out and that kind of thing. So we've carried that forward. Also, a big reason for doing this review is to address new issues that weren't around or weren't at the same level or didn't need attention or regulation at the time. So things like Airbnb, current housing shortage, all that, and many other issues. And then also we wanted to review and update regulations that maybe are in place and maybe are working, but we felt would be tweaked to be a bit more effective. And we are mandated to do these plan reviews by the province, but and we're a little bit overdue. The current plan was approved back in 2004, so almost 20 years. So just quickly, I didn't put this together for the think back in 2004. It was quite a long time ago. I mean, a bunch interesting there, but like Facebook was just starting. And think about now how much Facebook influences public discourse in many of our everyday lives. As well, a little more serious. The average cost of a home was $245,000 across the country. This year, it's estimated to be $685,000. So a lot can change in 19 years.
Wait, go back.
So basically, when we undertook this plan review, we began with the secondary planning strategy, which is the policy document that speaks to visions and goals and the way that growth and development should happen. And then it has the companion document, which is the land use bylaw. So we'll start just a little bit here. So we worked with the Village Planning Advisory Committee. So that's a group of citizen members as well as Councillor Wells as the councillor for the village. And so we began the review process with them, and we went through the existing plan to look at existing policies and try to flag things that needed updating or needed removal, and where other items might be needed. When we did the work on the municipal plan in 2014, beginning of 2014, ended in 2020, there was some public engagement done in and around the village in 2014 and 2015. So we went back to that and looked at that to see whether that work was still relevant to this review. And in many ways, we felt it was, and then we basically took that as a starting point and built on that. And so what we aim to do is that the new documents would match the style of the municipal plan that we approved in 2020. So we've got some revised zone names. Overall, the zone boundaries haven't changed a lot. We'll go through each of the zones and I'll show you on maps where they have changed. But there's a lot of homage paid to the existing plan in the new plan. And like I said, we've tried to just make the changes we felt were necessary, would be effective, and not just change things for the sake of changing them. So just briefly, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the secondary plan itself. So it uses something called character areas. This is an approach that we introduced in the municipal planning strategy. A character area is basically just a description that describes a geographic area. And we look at different types of character. I mean, that could be different types of land use, like rural or urban. And basically each character area in the plan is described, and then there's a set of zones within that character area that all fall within that area. So we use that same approach here with the village plan, and we came up with 3 character areas. So there's the village core and peninsula area, the North Street area, and then the outer village area. And again, we'll go through all of these in more detail a bit later. The secondary plan also introduces something called overlays. So in addition to the existing zoning map, which is like the colorful map that shows, single units here and commercial zones over here, overlays fit over top of those zones, and they may sit over different zones. And basically, they just add a second set of rules over top of whatever your underlying zoning regulations are. Again, we'll go through each of these, but things like environmental protection are done through an overlay, because that may not depend so much on the zoning, but more geography if you're around a lake or a water course or something like that. So in the secondary plan, the purpose is to direct growth and development in the village. Like I said, there's a series of shared goals that are listed in the municipal planning strategy that we carry forward into the village plan, and they are applicable in the village. But there's also, and probably what maybe was a little more relevant to today's session here, a set of specific or unique village goals. So that is the existing village character as the point of reference for redevelopment. That the village is primarily a residential environment. Of course, there's a traditional commercial core. And that the plan will aim to maintain character through new regulations for new development and to enhance surrounding structures and streetscapes. Also, as we do basically any time we do planning, a big part of why we do it is to try to control land use and development in order to minimize conflicts between different types of uses. So the secondary plan also, in addition to all the zones and the character areas, it also has a number of policies on a wide range of other issues that are related to, but not directly part of the municipal planning process. You'll see the whole list there. It's a wide range of things. And generally the policies are linkages to other strategies or other plans or other objectives that are being worked on in the municipality. So for example, a housing strategy plan might say, this plan has changes and regulations to support the approved housing strategy, and there may be some policies in that area. So those areas are all touched upon in the plan, but they're not all detailed out, and those don't necessarily get carried forward into the land use bylaw regulation. Finally, the secondary plan also introduces the zones, and we'll go through them again. There have been some changes to zone names, which actually will start to touch on now. So on the left column are the currently existing zone names in the village plan, and on the right are the proposed new names. Like I said, toward the end of the presentation, we'll go through each one of those zones, show where they are on the map, and talk about the permitted uses in each. I guess the one comment I'll make here is you'll see in terms of our residential zones, we have changed from having unique named residential zones to an R1 through R4 system. The start of that was around the discussion around the estate residential zone. We heard from a number of places that term was a bit of a loaded term, and maybe not the best thing to use in a planning strategy where we wanted, money doesn't necessarily dictate where you should live. And so that was the impetus for looking at them. But then honestly, when we started to look at the other zones, the only one that really felt it matched was the Central Village residential zone, because that was in the center of the village. The other ones, in one or two words, it was very hard to describe everything all encompassing that should fit within that zone. And so for that reason, and then also, I guess you could think of it as a standardization. Most other bylaws work this way, go through a hierarchical zone, R1 through R4 or even R5. So again, we'll get into the details of that, but that's probably the most substantial change in terms of the zone names. So quickly, and we'll come back to this. This is the proposed new zoning map, and again we'll get into each one. But before we get into the zones, I want to talk about another really important part of the land use bylaw. So we've moved out of the policy document, we're now into the regulatory document, which Heather in the back is the one who administers there as a development officer, which issues permits. And so the land use bylaw contains each zone and a series of regulations which we already go through, but there's a section before that called general provisions, and those, unless they're otherwise noted in a particular zone, these apply to all zones as they're listed here. And a lot of the hotly debated topics, short-term rentals, accessory structures, those kind of things are all contained in the general provisions. So we're going to take a little bit of time and go through some of these, because, like I said, these do have a big impact on how land use happens. So the first one is accessory structures. So accessory structure is you'd have the main building on the lot, which would be your house. An accessory structure would be a garage or a garden shed, essentially something other than the main building on the lot. So there are regulations in the current plan for accessory structures. And we kept many of those. So the setback of 1.2 meters to a lot line is the same as it would be today. We'll talk about this on the next slide, but generally accessory structures aren't to be used for human habitation except as an accessory dwelling unit. So that's a very specific type, and the next slide will go into that a little bit more. So generally they should be 1.2 meters from any lot line. However, we have an exemption for one accessory structure per lot, which is not called a boathouse in the plan, but you could think of as a boathouse, and that could be built to basically to the ordinary high water mark. So if you wanted to have a shed to keep kayaks or canoes or paddles, life jackets, that kind of thing, which is something that we get request for currently. Accessory structures need to be located in the side or the rear yard of the lot, and then in the zones, there are some specific limitations on the number of structures per lot. We'll get into that in the zones. In addition, some zones have lot coverages, so the total amount of a lot can be covered by structures. And we have a provision here for small accessory structures, so basically those under about 215 square feet, and those are permitted. And they don't count towards the lot coverage. So if you maxed out getting your house garage on the lot and you didn't have a place to store your lawnmower or rake, you could put essentially a small garden shed one according to the zone provisions. So accessory dwelling units. So there's a couple of different types of accessory dwelling unit. It essentially is anything other than the main dwelling unit on the lot. So that could be a basement apartment or a loft apartment in the main building, or it could be a unit that was in a small garden suite, might be something people have heard of. So an accessory dwelling unit could be located in the main building, or it could be located in another building on the lot. But in either case, permitted in all residential zones, limited to one per lot. So that doesn't mean you can have a basement suite and a unit in the backyard. It's one or the other. You have to pick. They're limited to 95 meters squared, which is about 1,000 square feet. You need to be able to provide one additional parking space. And if the unit is located, and you'll see this line repeated a few other times, we talk about 2 unit dwellings later. If the accessory unit is located in the main building, then the second entrance has to be either at the side or the rear of the building, or it has to go through a common vestibule where you walk in through one door and then you go into the unit that way. The thinking here is that we're trying to keep, when you view the building from the street, that it will keep the appearance of a single unit dwelling, even if it is a 2 unit dwelling or has a basement apartment. We want to promote more housing, and we want to create what can be, and I will hesitate to use the term affordable, but more affordable housing through these kind of smaller units and that kind of thing. So that's, but we also want to maintain some of that character, which we drive down the street now, is primarily you see a single unit home. So we want to try to keep the look the same, but allow some flexibility to add some additional units.
Can you go back one slide real quick?
Sure.
But not used for habitation.
Except as an accessory home. Yeah. And that's what this is. Yeah, so it's just in general, your garage isn't supposed to be lifted unless you've got a permit to say it's actually an accessory dwelling unit. It's just a bit of clarification, just to make sure that it keeps limited to one per lot and those kind of things. The other important piece that I just want to touch on here is and again, this is all draft as proposed, but as proposed, accessory dwelling units would not be permitted to be rented as a short-term rental. So they couldn't be used for Airbnb or Verbo or any of those other. What they could be done is you could rent it out on a long-term basis through a lease that basically anything that's over 30 days, it has a lease associated with it, falls under the Residential Tenancies Act, which is provincial legislation. So we consider that to be the same as if you own the home. That's long-term rentals, and we don't regulate that any different from the home. But and again, thinking you'll be trying to create more housing for people to live in rather than just as tourist accommodation. That's what we have proposed.
Garth, is 30 days the pivot point between short term and?
Yeah, and there's more provincial legislation that's coming now, so all short-term rentals now have to be registered.
That's 30 days or less.
Yes.
So the minute it's over 30 days, then it's a different kind of rental.
Yeah. Yeah, and it falls under different legislation. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's the next one we're going to talk about is architectural and design controls. I'm just going to flip ahead just quickly to take a look at a map. So the architectural controls work in there's two sets essentially. So we're going to talk about the green area first, and then we'll talk about the brown area. So I just wanted to put that in your mind. The rules right now are only within the green area here. So currently there is a height limit of 10 meters in the village. And if your roof pitch is less than 4 and 12, which is a fairly shallow pitch, then you have to go down to 8 meters. You're penalized 2 meters if you don't what currently is considered to be a more steeply pitched roof. We're proposing to tweak that a little bit. It's not drastically different, as you see with the numbers here, but we are making some changes, or proposing to make some changes. So, and I should mention as well that the architectural piece and the character piece was a tricky one. We have calls from people, and I continue today, to say we should lock down development and very stringent controls should be done for any new building. And that's a valid comment. And we have calls that the village should be a heritage conservation district where each and every design needs to be approved by committee. And then we have other calls to say we shouldn't do any of that. And so what we tried to find here is compromise. And we brought in FDM Architects as a consultant firm, and they did a character and built form study of the village earlier over the winter and spring. And that work was all presented to council, and there were a couple public sessions on that too. So that work helped us inform what we're proposing here as new regulations. We also often heard that under the current height regulations, there are many buildings that exceed that and couldn't be built today, but those are the buildings, some of the buildings that people see as iconic, like for example, the Playhouse exceeds the current height limit. Wellesley, the building, many of the buildings that we think of as being part of the character of Chester Village actually couldn't be recreated. So this is an attempt to get back to that, I guess you'd say. So the height limit now is proposed to range from 8 meters to 11 meters. Again, currently it's basically 8 meters to 10 meters. And the way we do that is by this table here. So essentially, depending on your pitch, you're put into one of these 3 categories, and that will dictate your height. So if you're 8 and 12 or higher, which is a very steep pitch, you can go up to 11 meters. So that's higher than what's currently allowed. If you're moderate, which is 412 to 812, you can go to 10 meters, and if you're low, which is 412 or less, 8 meters. In the 2 images here, the one on the left, that is likely a 12 and 12 pitch. That's a steeply pitched roof. So that would be in the high category. They would be permitted to go to 11 meters. It's not considered that building is 11 meters, just example, the roof pitch. And then the one in the middle is probably a 2 and 12, definitely under 4 and 12, and so that's quite a cool pitch. And I think the thinking behind why we allow taller buildings with more steep pitched roofs is in part due to the massing. So if you have a rectangle that goes 11 meters high, that's going to take up a lot more space, a lot more area than if you have this pitched roof for the top story or so. And again, that is all part of is traditionally the scene in the village. So that's the change to the height limit itself. The other proposed change is to how we measure height. So currently, we measure from the absolute lowest point where basically the exposed foundation meets the dirt to the absolute highest point on the peak. It's an easy way to explain it because it's like the lowest point, and that includes if you had a basement walkout, you'd be going to the bottom of your basement walkout, even if everywhere else it was out higher. What we're proposing to do here is keep it on the peak. We're going to still measure to the peak, keep that nice and simple. So the very top part of the roof, we measure from there. But on the bottom end, and this little image here is hopefully will help that. Basically, what we're going to do is rather than take the absolute lowest point, which would be indicated by this arrow here, we're going to take the lowest point and the highest point, and then find the middle one. And that's what the red represents there. And that's what we call established grade. So essentially what that does is if you're building on a slope, it doesn't penalize you by going quite as far down. The reason why I think that's valid to consider is what happens currently where you are penalized, or if you want to think about it that way, where we are measured at the very end, is what people will often do is before they come in for any permits, they'll terrace the property. So they'll cut into the hill, they'll build a nice big retaining wall, and then they'll build flat up to 10 meters to maximize the height they can do. So this would hopefully incentivize people not to do that, to work with topography without overly penalizing them on how, what kind of a structure, what kind of, whether they can get a 2.5 story home. So that's what we propose now, is that change just on the bottom end, keeping from the peak down, but a change on the bottom. In addition to the height pieces, there's other architectural stuff too, believe it or not. This first one is existing today, and we want to bring it forward. We think it works really well. Basically, buildings that have a footprint over 1,500 square feet, which is 140 square meters, and need to incorporate varied massing. Essentially, what that means is they need to break the building up into different parts or different elements, roof lines, porches, or other design elements. But basically, it's to prevent blocking square, uninterested building. And to date, we feel the consultants at BM felt that is doing its job, and so why mess with something if it's working well? The rest of it is new though. So we proposed that again for buildings over 1,500 square feet, that only a maximum of 25% of the facade in front of the building could be covered by vinyl, unfinished concrete, or concrete block. So again, there's different calls here. We have the calls for very tightly architectural control. We shouldn't allow certain materials, and then we have calls on the other side, and also affordability on the other side, trying not to price people out. And so again, this was felt like it could be a compromise. So buildings below 1,500 square feet footprint, it doesn't apply. They can be fully clad in vinyl, and we have examples of that in the village, and that I think is fine. But for larger structures, we'd be asking to use if you might put it this way, a higher quality material for the majority of the cladding. Yeah.
The 25% of the facade covered by vinyl unfinished concrete. Is that 25% in total can be covered by something other than more than glass? Is that what that means?
Yes, we're not saying it has to be water glass, but I probably struggle. But yeah, I mean,
my question really is: could it be no more than 25% of vinyl? No more than 25% of
no.
finished concrete?
I see. Yeah, good question. No, so it would be of those three together, 25% of it.
You need an Oxford comment in your concrete.
In the bylaw, if it should be written more clearly, like this is just but yes, fair point.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, that is the intent that 75% would be something other than those three materials. Yes. So as well, we're proposing to incorporate some limits to window area, or you could think of this as glass area as well. So the basic would be up to 60% per wall, but there would be an allowance to go up to 80% as long as the glass was divided by widths to break it up into appear to be different panes and not essentially. Frankly, what we're trying to avoid here is the very modern style of design that we see sometimes with a modern metal frame and then a full glass wall all the way around. It's a style, it's I'm not saying it's an unattractive style, but there have been a couple of examples in Chester Village that have been built that haven't been well received by the community, and we think this is a pretty clear way of doing that and still allowing. What we don't want to do is limit people, getting passive solar and like taking advantage of all those kind of things, and that's why we've got the 60-80 split there. So as long as you have a traditional looking window, you can go up to 80%, which is a significant amount of glass. Think about that as your whole wall. Currently, we have a provision here that would prohibit the use of metal siding. We did want to note that metal roofing is not included with that. This is already we've only done a couple of sessions. It's already received a little bit of pushback, and just like everything else, it's totally valid for comment. I've added these pictures since I first presented this because the image on the right here at the top is a fairly new condo building in Mahone Bay, town of Mahone Bay, built in the architectural area. And the bottom image is what it looks like when you get about 20 feet away. I don't even know if it's coming through, but you can see the rivets is my point. So it's got the nice horizontal look. But when you get closer, you can definitely tell that it's metal or that it's not wood. So I'm not judging, but I just want to be clear. We could also change that so it's not a conversation, but we change it to have some language to say, no sheet metal siding, and get descriptive to try to say the types we don't want and maybe the types that are okay. So along with everything else, curious to hear what people think of that as we go through. Finally, we proposed regulations for attached garages. In short, there is basically a ratio of how large the garage can be in relation to the house, that the house has to be a dominant feature. And there's also a provision so that the garage door is set back from the street compared to the man door or first door, I should say. And that's to avoid that sort of suburban style development where you get garage doors pushed right down the driveway to the street. So like I said, those are the rules proposed for the green area. We'll now talk about the brown area, and it's or orange, and it's a simplified list of what we just went through. So we basically keep 3 of those provisions. So the very massive for buildings 1,500 square feet or more. Again, currently the prohibition on metal siding, and then the regulations for attached garages. So there's a pretty big step when we cross that line in terms of there still is a height limit, but we're no longer concerned with the pitch of your roof. We're no longer concerned about how much glass you're using. Again, just want to draw that distinction.
Garth, just before you move on, where you say prohibit the use of the metal siding, but then in your discussion, you said, well, we're not saying we're not going to do it.
Well, I'm just saying that has already received a bit of like, oh, why would we do that? And it was actually when I presented it to council, honestly. And so that's what I'm just saying. I just wanted to highlight that as that's already been flagged. Maybe that's going too far in one direction. So that's something we'll consider. The other piece, and I apologize, I'm just going to step over for a second. Councillor Wells has been, he wanted me to pass along that he was unable to make it today. He may make it later, and as I said, we are recording this, so he's going to watch the comments. He's been to 4 of these presentations so far from the council, the village planning advisory, and he's here on Saturday for our first session as well. So he does plan to come to all of them. He's going to watch the discussion. I should have mentioned it. So apologies for that, but he is paying attention as the message. So this next slide is just sort of a miscellaneous group of unrelated things in the general provisions. The first one, corner vision triangle. This is something that again is standard in many other bylaws. It's a safety issue, and I think it's something that we need to seriously consider. Essentially, the way it works is if you look at the image on the right, anytime you have an intersection, measuring back 6 meters or about 20 feet along either street, and then drawing a line across to connect it. So you see a right triangle there. Within that triangle, what we're proposing is that all vegetation and structures would be limited to 0.75 meters, about 2.5 feet. The reason for that is sightline. lines. It's so that you can see around the corner and you're not having to do it out. I mean, you can imagine today, many intersections in the village, you have to pull out like almost into the lane before you can safely see whether you can actually pull out. So I don't know why this is in the current document, but it is in many others, and this will have some impacts because this doesn't mean you have to take down a structure that's in that spot already, but it will impact vegetation and it will impact new buildings, new structures going forward. So it'll have an impact on private property. It'll also have an impact on municipal property in terms of like our public works. It's going to have to go do some more clearing and cutting in certain areas. But I think it's an important one to at least bring forward those. So we also have proposed that community gardens would be permitted in all zones through a development permit. We have regulations for electric vehicle charging. That's another good example of something that in 2004 we were talking about too much. So essentially, we have rules if you want to do it as a non-commercial use at your house. We make it very easy to install one. And if you want to do it as a commercial use, we basically treat it like a service station, like a gas station, has similar types of rules to go through. There also are rules in the land use bylaw for farm animals. So every lot within the village area can have 6 hens. You do need a permit for that. And there are setback requirements for like the coop and structures, those kind of things. And then if you're outside of the core, if you think back to that architectural map to the brown area, if you're outside of the green, there are regulations that would theoretically allow you to have larger animals. It depends on your lot size, so you need to have a minimum of about an acre in order to have owl or a horse or those kind of things. And then depending on how large your lot is, you can have more. We do have some existing instances of horses and other animals in the village. So the direction from council initially was to bring in some regulations and then we'd see what we got, how those were received. But I think the 6 hens makes a lot of sense. That it doesn't prevent all nuisance, but it does. You're not going to have the roosters crowing. We actually have a special language in there. Thanks to staff who have knowledge of farm animals around prevent guinea hens, which can be really noisy even if they are hens. So we've done our best so that you will hopefully just have some quiet plucking chickens. We've also, and this is carried forward, we've brought forward some protection for the Old Stone Bridge on Victoria Street. And like I said, we had a session on Saturday, and kudos to those who were able to make it out. But I was commenting that there's something kind of funny about the fact that old bridge was what was keeping traffic flowing when number 3 was closed. It's pretty incredible. Anyway, so we've carried forward those protections to make sure that any construction that's close to that bridge has to have engineering studies to ensure that it won't damage or cause harm to it. And finally, in terms of this sort of miscellaneous slide, we're proposing no new cemeteries or expansion of cemeteries in the village boundary. That would not stop existing cemeteries from using the space they've already got. But the thinking here would be that it's a limited amount of space, and again, in the interest of affordability, and we'd like to preserve that space for living folks. And that also is coupled with I'm not an expert, my understanding of that trends in terms of burials are changing towards cremations and memorial walls and other types of things where space is less needed in order to have more density, I guess, in that sense. So anyway, we propose that. I think it's a good one for discussion potentially, but that's again how we drafted it currently. Quickly, just to touch on electrical generation facilities. So essentially it's solar panels and wind turbines. So we have regulations for solar panels. If they're attached to a building, they generally will not require a permit unless they're in that core, the green area, the architectural area, where they will require a permit. And we've also written in that they will be allowed to extend 2 years above the height limit. Thinking there is to make sure that they can be properly positioned, and then there needs to be space for airflow for safety reasons and that kind of thing. That's what that's there for. If you have off-building solar collectors, we treat them similar to an accessory structure. They're setbacks from property lines, but we do have a max size limit of how large it can get, so you can't have a giant array in the backyard. And again, like accessory structures, it has to be located in the side or the rear yard. In terms of wind, it's currently only proposed to be permitted in the outer village area, so that brown area. The limit of 1 per lot. We have a maximum of 5 kilowatts production capacity, a 20-meter max height for the tower, and a 3 times the height of the tower setback. So if the tower went to 20 meters, you'd have to have 60 meters from all property lines. So that's again what we have proposed in there. When you move out to the municipal side, we allow for larger structures. So this is sort of a scaled down version, except I would say on solar, where we've tried to remain quite permissive, because that really is, once it's installed, as long as there's no issues with reflection or anything like that, it tends to be fairly passive. It's not going to create noise or wind or shadows or anything like that that could create a nuisance to neighbors. So a big one that I know is going to be a hot topic, short-term rentals. So we do have regulations proposed. As I mentioned earlier, in April, the province brought in changes so that all short-term rentals now are required to register with the province. And we are in the process of signing a data sharing agreement with them, so we'll have access to their registries and we'll be much better able to track where they are. So we're basically proposing that they would be permitted. And I should mention as well, this slide really is speaking about residential zones. We treat them differently in commercial zones, and I'll get into that when we get into the commercial zone, but this is all residential zones. So they'd be limited to 1 unit per lot. They can't include meeting rooms or restaurants or anything else like a hotel could have that might be open to the public. So it's really intended to be rented by one party at one time. No signage. It would, like we mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be permitted in the accessory dwelling units. So that would either be whether it's in the backyard or whether it's the basement apartment. You're not able to use those for short terms. And the key one, and this is again tied to what the province brought in, is that proof that the property is the primary residence of the owner needs to be provided in order to get that permit. So what that means is there'll be no more number of companies operating Airbnbs in residential zones, and there'll be no more individuals operating multiple Airbnbs in the residential zones. You'll be only able to operate one, and it has to be your primary residence. And with the accessory dwelling piece, it basically means it's moving back to how Airbnb and those kind of things started, which is you go on vacation and you rent your house while you're away for a few weeks or days. Okay, yes,
Just general check. The requirements and some of the qualifications and stuff that you put into all the slides. What about pre-existing and the particularly here?
Yeah,
that pre-existing goes to a lot of the stuff that you talked about.
yes. So generally, things that are pre-existing structures and those kind of things are protected. People usually use the term grandfathered. We call it non-conforming in plainer speak. However, and I've already had discussions with the solicitor on this. We are going to put in some special language in this case so that there will be no grandfathering of short-term rentals. As of the date of the new bylaw, everybody who doesn't come in and get a permit will be operating. Sorry to enforcement. Yeah. Thank you for that question, because that's a really key piece. And it works differently than most of the rest of it does.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
How short is short term?
Less than 30 days. Yeah, anything over 30 days goes through the Residential Tenancies Act. So that's we encourage that kind of housing, long-term rentals. Yeah. So I've done parking next. So we've simplified from the current parking requirements. We've simplified them, and in most cases reduced them, although there are a few cases potentially on light industrial where it might not be a reduction, it might be similar. So essentially for residential, it's 1 space per dwelling unit. And for commercial, institutional, light industrial, it's 1 space per roughly 530 square feet of public floor area.
Space off the road?
Yes, this is on the lot.
Property.
Yeah.
Got it.
So anytime 5 or more on-site parking spaces are required, there's extra rules. These mostly are for safety and come out of engineering, and we had some questions on whether these could be reduced and checked, and the engineers told us no. So the access and egress basically have to have a 3 meter for one-way traffic and a 6 meter wide driveway, essentially for two-way. The parking spaces need to be freely accessible at all times, all lined up in a row. And I suppose this didn't come from engineering, but we proposed that when you have 5 or more parking, maybe we partially screen that through either vegetation or fencing to hopefully reduce the impact on, again, on neighboring properties. So as I mentioned in the secondary plan, we've got a couple of things called overlays. These are, I guess, the environmental protections, maybe would be the best way to explain it. So the first one is the lakefront overlay. It's a 20-meter setback for the main building. It applies to all lakes across the municipality. And we're proposing to bring it into the village as well, because a little piece of Stanford Lake is within the village boundary. And the municipal side already has that 20-meter setback, so we'll just make it all the way around the lake. We'll have the same setback. And it's generally, I think, serve us well. I know the weekends rain has brought some discussions already about, is this even enough? But outside of this, really unprecedented kind of water levels that we have, and generally that is a good provision. Aside from the lakefront overlay, we also have a second set of setbacks, and this is tied to some provincial mapping that is publicly available and it's updated on a regular basis. And so basically what it says is anytime you need a development permit, if that database, that map, shows that there's a water course, water body, or a wetland, then you need to have a 20-meter setback from it. So the result is similar to the overlay, which is a 20-meter setback for your main building. However, we have proposed, and this is new for the village, this doesn't exist on the municipal side yet, or currently, a new relief mechanism, so that if you get a study from a qualified professional, certified in environmental work or in flood management, and they can show that essentially the intent of the setback that the property is subject to seasonal flooding, then that setback can be reduced down to 10 meters in those instances. The reason we're proposing that relief mechanism is just an acknowledgement of in the village, it's smaller lot sizes, and you may have less flexibility with where you want to place your structure on the lot. So if you're able and willing to go to that extra expense and hire somebody to do that work, and it can show that what we're trying to do, which is protect the structure and protect the water course, are met, then we can allow for a reduction in that case. And so just quickly, so this is the overlays map. The red hashed area is the bottom piece of Stanford Lake, that's showing that 20-meter setback, and the green and blue, which is hard to see maybe in the blue, you can see it. That's the old Stone Bridge, and so that just signifies the area within which you have to go through some extra hoops just to make sure, like I said, that that's going to be protected. So we're almost into the zones. We're done the general provisions, but there's one extra section that I did want to touch on, which is signage. The long and the short of it is not a lot's changing from the current bylaw. And the reason is because in 2022, we went through some significant amendments to the signage section of the land use bylaw. It began with a request to introduce the allowance for illuminated signs in the highway commercial zone, which is number 3. And so as part of that work, we ended up digging into signage in quite a big way and made some changes to the sizes and the numbers of signs that are allowed. So unless or until we here, we didn't feel that there were any significant issues with the way things work, but again, I don't want to present that. So I guess as a general overview, all commercial signage needs a permit. So there are exemptions for things like real estate signs or traffic signs or plaques, memorial plaques, anything that's commercial does need a permit. And it also has to be located on the same site as the business that it advertises. So in the village, we don't allow called off-site signage, basically. And then we have a number of categories of different signs: ground signs, wall signs, window signs, drive-through menu board signs, and illuminated signs, and they each have their own set of regulations in terms of how big they can be, how many per lot. There's a few differences in different zones, and then things like illuminated signs are only permitted in highway commercial zones, so they're not allowed to come. Okay, so now we're in part 2 of the presentation, which is to go through the character areas and zones, and I this is a lot, so feel free if you want to drink or anything to get out. So we'll start with the village core and peninsula area. So this includes the historic center of the village and the 3 surrounding peninsulas. There's well-established traditional residential neighborhoods, as well as the traditional corridor, one plus to do. And if you look at it on a map, you'll see many of the lots still reflect that traditional grid pattern that was laid out in 1760 when the township was originally designed. And what the goal, like one of the goals, I guess, of the plan here is to allow what I call, it's not my term, but using the term gentle density, which is things like those accessory dwelling units, while trying to maintain the traditional scale and look of the area. So the purple area is what we're talking about now, the village core and peninsula area. Sorry. And there are 5 zones of this area, so we'll go through each of those now. So the first one is the residential 1 zone. So this was formerly the estate residential zone. Basically it is the R1 to R4 generally means that R1 is more restrictive and R4 is more permissive in generally that direction. So the only permitted use in the zone is a single unit dwelling. You can't have an accessory dwelling unit because those are general provisions, but single unit dwelling is the permitted use. And then there are some zone provisions that work just within this zone. The first one, which I'll touch on, and this has already again got some pushback. Currently in this zone, it has a very large minimum lot size. It's 40,000 square feet, it's about an acre. That's the smallest lot you can create. You're subdividing and create your lots. And at council, through the FDM study, and internally ourselves, when we looked at it, that is drastically out of step with the rest of the village. Some of this zone has municipal sewer, and when you have municipal sewer, it's extremely inefficient to have big, large lot sizes. You think about the amount of pipe you have per dwelling unit, and so the closer you can get stuff together, the denser, that's going to mean better efficiency in terms of sewage and infrastructure costs. But not all of the zone is served. So that part of the tricky part of it is there are many lots that are Freedom Peninsula, for example, don't have access to sewer. So what we propose here is that it's a fairly big change. Like I said, it has received some pushback, but it's also received some support from other sides. So curious to hear as we work through what you think. In essence, the 40,000 square foot lot size we're proposing to reduce to 1,000 meters squared, which is about 10,500 square feet. So it's about 25% of what it was. Keep in mind, that's the minimum lot size. You can still create larger lot size, and there's nothing that's ever going to come out and tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, you need to divide your lot into 2. That's your option as a property owner. So this is just saying, if you want to, that's as small as you can make it. Part of the existing character and some of the pushback that we've heard on this is that this zone, and the way it's described in the current plan, is typically larger homes on large lots with a low ratio of development to undeveloped lots. So like a lot of grass, a lot of yard with there's still large buildings, but because the large lots are so large, they have that compression. So we've attempted to maintain that character while scaling everything down. And that's what some of these other proposed regulations are intended to do. So we have a maximum lot coverage of 25% in that zone. And in addition to that, the table at the bottom dictates how large the footprint of new structures could be. And quick math will show you, if you go down to the minimum of 1,000 meters squared and you build a 350 meter squared building, you're at 35% lot coverage. That's intentional. That means if you go down to the minimum lot size, you can't build the biggest types to do the only one you have to build in that zone. So those all work together. And the thinking is, again, as your lot size gets smaller, your building gets smaller. So the hope is that that will help to maintain some of that character of a large amount of undeveloped area to the developed area. Like I said, we've got some people that don't think that's the way to go, or that it's too drastic a change. And so those are all valid comments here. But that's what we've come up with. That's what the FDM report helped, like I said, helped inform. And so that's what we're proposing there. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about accessory structures. There is an allowance. So in this zone, you can have 2 small accessory structures. So that's the 215 square feet or less. And those do not count towards your 25% lot coverage. So just to see where that zone is, so it's the light yellow color here. So 3 peninsulas, and then there's a section here on the sort of the west side, back harbor side of the corridor. Next one is the residential 2 zone. So this was previously the central village residential zone. So we're talking right in the core here. You can see it. 2 permitted uses in this zone, single unit dwelling and 2 unit dwelling. Again, some zone provisions here. So there's a maximum footprint for main buildings of 200 meters squared. And again, like the accessory dwelling units, if you have a 2-unit dwelling, it has to appear like a single unit dwelling on the street. So you either have to have a common entrance at the front, or you have to have a second entrance at the side rear. Again, in this zone, rather than 2 small accessory structures, you could have 1 small accessory structure that doesn't count towards your lot coverage. And you'll see we do the lot coverage a little different in the table over here. So it's not just a straight percentage in this zone. It depends on how many dwellings you have and how large your lot is. And if you have more dwellings and you have a larger lot, you get a little bit of the bonus. And that's what you'll see there. You essentially get 50 square meters if you have a large lot, and you get 50 square meters if you have a 2-unit dwelling. So if you have a 2-unit dwelling on a large lot, you get the 300 meters square lot coverage there. I should also mention this zone currently does have a lot coverage provision. It's a table with 4 categories. It's not exactly the same as this, but this is intended to kind of clarify and simplify it. And it basically says if you have a lot, it has, you know, small, medium, large, and extra large kind of thing. And if you have a small lot, it has a different coverage percentage, and that the percentage goes down as the lot size goes up. So the largest lot, it's 15%. On the smallest lot, I think it's 30%. So this aims to simplify that, but it still does acknowledge that on larger lots, you can build a slightly larger building. And again, just to get an idea of where this is, so we're talking about this orangey color here, so again, basically right in and around the village. Just for reference, this is the school property here in Pickley Road. So that's essentially the extent that they're in. Next, we'll talk about the core commercial zone. So this is Pleasant, Duke, Queen, and Valley. This is fairly similar to the current, it's called the central commercial zone currently. So slight name change, but similar in terms of the permitted uses. So there's a pretty wide range of commercial uses on the left, but you will note there's things like highway commercial types of uses. We do restrict in this zone, so drive-throughs aren't allowed, those kind of things. I guess I should stop and take a second to talk about development agreements. So for those that so when we say permitted uses, that means you come in and say, I'd like to do a bakery, and you show that you meet the yard setbacks in the land use bylaw, and if there's a lot coverage or any of those provisions, and then Heather will review that application and issue your permit. There's no public protest involved, and it's laid out in the bylaw. This is okay if you fit within these boxes, basically. A development agreement is a little bit different. And it's essentially a negotiated agreement with council. In the current plan, development agreements are virtually non-existent, and that was at the wish of the community at the time. Get back to 2004. So at the community at the time had lost faith in the development agreement process as a tool. They felt, and my take on it is it's cool. So it's all about how it's used and set up and supported through the plan. My understanding from looking back at the old plans is that things like industrial uses in residential zones could go through by development agreement. We don't use them that way at all. We're much more selective in how we use them. And as you can see here, proposed, sorry, I guess it's dependent on development agreements. So it's a negotiated agreement with council. It goes through a series of public meetings, 3 or 4 public meetings, and ultimately a public hearing. So there's much more community involvement and opportunity for feedback and input from the community. And council can also ask the developer to make changes based on what they hear from the community. So that's why there's more flexibility. There is also more flexibility for the developer and what they can ask for. Exactly, they don't have to necessarily meet all of the setbacks from land use bylaw. They can propose slight changes. So it's a bit of a give and take, but the point is it's done in a public session and numerous points of public input. So both the council's direction and as the senior planner, I think it's time to introduce development agreements in certain ways. We don't want to overdo it. There's places that overdo it, and you often hear horror stories about development agreements taking 4 to 6 years to approve in HRF, and that also the way it works here. It's a 6 month to 8 month process usually if a developer comes in and they have everything they need. So by development agreement in the central commercial zone, this is actually currently allowed. It's the one type of development agreement currently there. You can do a residential dwelling up to 10 units. Nobody's taken us up on that, but that is theoretically possible. Also, beverage rooms and lounges that are over 1,200 square feet, they're tied to the Liquor Control Act, so that's where that size limit comes from. And then tourist accommodations of 5 or more units. And so, yes, take this opportunity to talk about tourist accommodations. So, like I said, we talked about short-term rentals. We were only talking about the residential zones. In the commercial zones, we use the term tourist accommodation, and that means short-term rentals, motels, traditional bed and breakfast, basically anything that can accommodate tourists. And so we treat them relatively the same in the commercial zones. So what this means is somebody could come in and through a development agreement, they could ask to build a 6-unit motel or hotel, or they could ask to build a 60-unit building that they intend to exclusively rent through short-term rentals. And either of those would fit under that category.
There's no limit on the number?
There's no limit, but that gets negotiated through the process of council. So that's where council has, I mean, there could be, if you think there's an accurate, like that would be some great feedback. But with, I guess, as proposed, there's not a limited number proposed right now. In the central or the core commercial zone, there are some zone provisions. We have most of the zones. So like I mentioned earlier, the drive-through uses are exclusively prohibited there. This next one is carried forward with the current plan. Commercial uses on the Valley Road and Duke have to have their commercial access Valley Road or Duke Street, so they can't have their access points going into other sort of more quiet residential streets that would be on the back of those lots. So again, we think that that's a good rule that's in there currently, so we want to bring that forward. New development needs to keep 50% of the ground floor area devoted for commercial use, and that has to be 80% of the building frontage. So those two work together. So basically, your ground floor, half of the space has to be commercial use, and we're going to want to push that towards the storefront so that 80% of the storefront has to be commercial use. So the thinking there is what we like is what you see when you walk down Pleasant Town, you've got a window shop, you've got windows and plate glass because you look at the stores, that's interactive, it creates a nice pedestrian scale environment for people to walk through, and that's why everybody flocks there to walk through and see it. What we would like to avoid is if you get a residential on the ground floor, you might have a blank wall, or you might have windows, they might be curved off, and it creates less interest. And yeah, so that's the thinking there. The reason we went with the 80% of the storefront and not 100% is we did want to allow for the option to say have a stairwell to go upstairs, so maybe you could have storefronts 80%, and then you've got a narrow doorway to go in and get up to the residential that's on top or something like that. Another, I think, big proposal, and I probably should have highlighted it better here in the slide. In this core commercial zone, we are proposing that for everything except for residential uses, you do not need to provide parking. So it's a big change. So it's exempted is the way I would word it. So residential uses will still be held in that one space per residential use, and that has to be on the site. But commercial or institutional uses will no longer have that requirement. The reason we're doing this is we believe that this will help spur some development and better use of some properties that might even be partially used but not fully utilized because they're limited by parking. We know from talking to people over the years that there are sometimes it'll be the second floor of a building will be unused or left as storage because that doesn't trigger parking requirements. But if we allow this, maybe there's a type of business or some offices or something else that could go in, and that will help preserve our commercial infrastructure. It's intended to help help those property owners and landlords generate revenue and maintain an active and vibrant commercial area. It is also a trend in planning, but we don't just do it because it's a trend, but there are generally trends to reduce parking requirements across the board. Some places are going as far as to remove it entirely, even residential uses. I think we want to take a little more staggered approach, and so we're just looking at it in one zone. And the other piece, and some people may believe this and some people did not, we did have a traffic study, council did have a traffic study done the last year, and it did show that there, other than peak race week, in their words, there's not a parking problem, she's a parking problem in the village. Now that's subjective and anecdotal, but with all of those things in mind, we feel like this is a good thing to propose and see how it works. The other thing that we are doing here, so like I said, residential still has parking, but they can have it on site, or if they sign an agreement with another property owner, they can have that parking located nearby. Basically, we have a radius defined, so if you can find a space down the street, and that would allow you to have more residential units in your building, then take advantage of that. So we tried to offer something for the residential uses as well, without going as far as just removing entirely.
Excuse me. Having a parking problem doesn't necessarily mean that there's not enough room for the cars. Sometimes the parking problem is people parking on both sides of the road and vehicles can't get through.
Yeah,
For the end of your driveway, you cannot get out.
yeah. And I know, and I mean, I don't want to get it too off track here, but happy to talk to it. So yeah, you're right. And there is more in that traffic study about traffic flow and potential pilot projects to look at one-way streets. And that is all still working its way through the council agenda and quite frankly through the provincial Department of Transportation, because they are the ones that own the streets. So we have to work in concert with them.
We don't need one-way streets, we need one side parking. Only parking on one side of the street and then there's no parking.
You should have a look at the traffic study, and we do have that available, because if that's not in there, then please want to speak to council about. Yep.
Look at Green Street and close parking instead. Make it pleasant.
All right, so this is just to show the corner commercial zone. So this is kind of just to kind of zoom in on it a little bit. So we have some Pleasant, Duke Street. Like I mentioned, we haven't made a lot of changes to the zoning map, but we have proposed to expand the commercial zone. This is the region here, the investment institutional lot. And so we have proposed between Duke and Water in this block essentially to make that commercial. The rest of this is already commercial. It essentially connects that corridor a little better. And it doesn't have any impact on people that are living there residentially today. I shouldn't say that it doesn't have any, but it doesn't force any change. Single unit houses are allowed in the commercial zone, so it doesn't force any change. What it would do is open up options so that commercial uses could be introduced in that area. The next zone we'll talk about is the marine development zone. So this zone replaces what's currently called the marine industrial zone. So it's essentially the high school boatyard, that area on Back Harbor. Currently, it allows basically boat building and boat repair and construction and marine uses, and that's about it. There's been, through my years here, I've heard both sides. I've heard calls to open that up because it can't be sold for the value that it's worth. And I've also heard calls that if we ever lose that industrial component, it will never, it's a part of the tradition and the character of Chester, and it would never happen again anywhere else. It's lost. It's kind of this push and pull as to what to do with this. And so what we're trying, with redevelopment zones again, to find a bit of a compromise here. So marine-related light industrial uses are permitted. The reason the asterisk is there is we only allow them on the current properties where that use is taking place. So that's essentially the boatyard on the harbor. But on any unit, on any lot in the zone, we're proposing to allow marine-related commercial uses, things like boat sales, rentals, displays, tours. Currently, there are a few businesses that do that, but the zoning is set up in a way that's going to call for that, even like they're renting one spot, and then the user kind of have to slug the kayaks themselves because we don't actually have any commercial zoning at the waterfront to allow kiosks there if you pick it up off a rack and go. So this would allow that kind of use, again, in the Back Harbor. And again, we talked about development agreements, so it's a more onerous process that involves that public input. So we proposed, again, tourist accommodations of 2 or more units in this zone, restaurants and marinas by development agreements. We've heard some of the early feedback that we've heard is we should also maybe consider residential uses in this if they're tied to a marine component. And the idea that was proposed would be like a condo type development where you buy a condo unit and you get a slip as well. There other parts of the world and province where those kind of units exist, and there were some comments that there may well be a market for that in Chester. So that was one comment we heard early on about this. That doesn't mean it's going to go in or not. It's just more of a note. So So yeah, so some fairly significant changes here, and especially I think when we look at the map, you'll see, so this is the existing area on Back Harbor. We've removed a few properties here that are in residential use. They're not in industrial use, so it felt appropriate to zone those as they're being used today, and sometimes newer development. There's the large boathouse that's there. That's developed that recently, so that's unlikely to change soon or to go back into the industrial use. So essentially, it's the properties listed, the properties shown here. Like I said, the listed PIDs are the only ones the industrial uses on. But we've also proposed, and this is the roadblock, to rezone the roadblock properties to this area development zone as well. Reason being, the roadblock currently is a grandfathered existing use in the waterfront residential zones, doesn't fit in that zone, and it's allowed to have 2 commercial uses and 1 residential unit, and that's what's written in as its grandfathered use. It doesn't allow any real flexibility other than you can change the name on it, but you can't change that mix in any way. This would open up that option. It also felt like the right choice. If you were creating a zone back here that would allow a waterfront restaurant by development agreement, if you have one of those, that might indicate that zone would be the appropriate one there too. Again, the reason I keep going back to this, no industrial use here, because it's not listed as industrial. So industrial uses are all back there. So would this allow the roadblock to potentially no longer be a restaurant? Yes, but it's only going to be a commercial, it's going to be commercial, it's not going to be a boat yard. So I just wanted to do that. Yeah. So that's it for the first character area, and it gets shorter from here. So the village boundary area is the next one. So this is outside the traditional center of the village. There's 3 clusters we're going to look at. And the new plan is aimed to allow a variety of housing types and densities in this zone. This was formerly, actually, so take a look. This is the 3 green clusters that we're looking at there. And there's only one zone actually in this character area, and it's the residential 3 zone. This was previously the low density residential zone. As I mentioned, that name just didn't fit. We're not trying to make it the high density residential zone, but it just didn't fit with what we're looking at here. So it's fairly straightforward. If there's no additional zone provisions, this is pretty much what you get. There's setbacks, of course, for buildings and property lines, but by development permit, you can go anywhere from a 1 to a 3 unit building. And then through development agreement, you can propose a multi-unit building or a group dwelling. And what we mean by group dwellings it's a sort of a newer style of development where you might have multiple sort of main buildings on the lot, generally smaller, and then maybe they have a communal building where they have shared kitchen facilities and that kind of co-housing is the term that's used for it. The eco village in Bridgewater, if everybody's familiar with it, that's an example. So it's just a different form of housing development. We certainly don't want to prohibit it, but it is a little out of the norm. And so both to ensure that things like servicing and access are appropriate to deal with, as well as to make sure that it fits in with the surrounding neighborhood, because sometimes they can almost be like a little community on a lot, and that's okay, but that's why that would be proposed by development agreement. It's a little bit out of the norm, and there's a lot of variation in what the kind of developments be. So again, the colors have changed here, but this is the orange is the residential 3 zone. So it's those 3 areas that we're talking about for these uses. So moving on to the North Street area. So this is the final character area to talk about. So this applies to lands adjacent to North Street, or the village accord. It's essentially our 2 main entryways to the village. And the plan here, we've proposed to reduce the area that's actually commercially zoned and make some changes to support a variety of housing options, including some small apartment buildings. So we're talking about the orange area now. So we said everything adjacent to Highway 3 or North Street. And there's 2 zones in this character area. So the residential 4 zone. So this is a brand new residential zone. This is not like the other ones were all used to be this. It's now this is brand new. By right, we would propose single unit, 2 unit, 3 unit, and anything multi-unit up to 8 by development permit. By development agreement, it would be 8 or more, and as well as group dwellings we talked about on the last slide. There are some zone provisions here. So if you have 3 or more units, you have to ensure that 25% of the total lot area is landscaped. That can be through contain existing vegetation or tree planting, but it can't be lawn. So we don't consider lawn to be landscaping. So it could be garden beds, flowers, it could be shrubs or bushes or trees, but it has to be a bit more substantial than just grass in the road area. So 25% of the total lot area has to be landscaped, and half of that 25%, so 12.5%, has to be located between the building and Highway 3. So the idea there is to kind of soften the view, create some beautification, and it's also a bit of a carryover currently in this area. And I don't want to get into too much because we could talk forever, but the whole North Street area is called the site plan approval area, and most development in that area requires something called site plan approval, which is a development process that goes through the development officer. It's not like a development agreement that it doesn't have the public meetings, but it is a higher standard and it requires a lot of design and engineering work to go along with it, which means the cost to go through site plan approval is much more significant as opposed to going through the development permit. It's, I think, in my opinion, and I think this is shared amongst some other staff, it has not helped to promote growth in that area. We've had multiple developers that come in and actively try to avoid going through it. They've changed their plan, they've abandoned their plans entirely. Sometimes it's expansion, sometimes it's new buildings. And so, you know, there's a fine line between some developers, if they don't want to meet the rules, that's probably okay. Maybe that's for the best, but it's happened to such an extent, and we've had so little change that's actually gone through there. We felt that it would be appropriate to take some of the key elements of those site plan approvals and bring them in as just a permit requirement, but trying to lower the barrier, the cost barrier, while still keeping some of those good things. So there were requirements in there for landscaping. So that's in part why we're proposing to bring this in. The other zone criteria is that any on-site parking has to be located at the side, the rear of the building. So pretty obvious the intent here is that's your parking between the building and the street. The one exception is for accessible parking spaces or bicycle parking. We let them go accessible, you can go basically wherever it's best suited for the entrance. So the R4 zone is the dark brown here. Like I said, the highway commercial is going to come up next pink area. There used to be a cluster that was here and a cluster up here by engineering. So this is proposing to rezone those areas to residential and maintain the cluster around the old country intersection. So the highway commercial zone. So this zone exists today, and again, much of it has been brought forward here. So large list of uses on the left there. Again, you'll notice different types of uses as compared to more of them, like service stations and those kind of things that we wouldn't want to see down in the center of the village. A bit of a bigger risk for uses by development agreement in the zone. And again, things that are tend to be more, have the potential to be more intrusive or create more nuisance, and that's why and then finally, we're just talking about the site plan. This is the one zone where we are using site plan for things like automobile service stations, drive-throughs, and then that commercial assembly outdoors or anything that is a commercial use but has an outdoor component to it, could be a venue or something else like that. And the site plan approval, again, without getting into all of it, it really is dealing with where things sit on the lot, flow of traffic, signage, and all that, how it all lays out on the lot. So for those particular uses, they felt like they didn't quite want the development agreement, but they also needed a bit more than just the development permit. And so the site plan is kind of a way of regulating there. I couldn't pick them on the first slide, so there are some provisions here, and you'll see many of two of these are basically identical to the R4 zone. So that means that entire corridor along North Street would have the same rules in terms of the landscaping. So the same thing here in the highway commercial, 25% of the lot has to be landscaped, and half of that has to be the building in the street. On-site parking has to be located on the side or rear. So those are the same, and like I said, those come from that current site plan approval area that encompasses the whole of Highway 3. In addition to the highway commercial zone, if you have 20 parking lot of 20 spaces or more, there has to be some natural elements break it up, like tree islands or hedges or other, just to create some visual interest hopefully stop the big sea of parking. And there are some increased setbacks if a highway commercial zone abuts an institutional or a residentially zoned lot, including the need to maintain a vegetative boundary. And the example that I have of that currently is, One's drive to the Shoreham Apartments, there's that stretch of trees, that actually is the buffer that's required under the current rules. We thought that was a good thing to maintain and bring forward. Okay, and then yes, just quickly, so this is the highway commercial zone, so that is that exists today. It's just like I said, so towards the other end, remove some of those areas. So finally, we're just about done. There are some zones that are permitted in all areas. They fit into one character area or another. They require some flexibility, and they also do have some policies and regulations to make sure that you fit in where you go. So we'll go through these fairly quickly. There's 3 of them. So the first one is the institutional zone. So there's here. The one I'll note there is the golf course, and that similar to the industrial uses in the marine zone. It's only on the existing property where the golf course is. So you can't do a golf course on any institutional lot. It's just where it is currently. Also, because private clubs and fraternal organizations, we propose to rezone the yacht club because that fits within this category. We've met with both of those groups. They didn't have any issues. One of the new changes here, I guess, is the
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yacht club did have an issue.
Oh, okay.
I met with them.
Yeah.
We wanted ours to stay the same.
Oh,
So
okay.
I would suggest you were reserved to do that.
Yeah, we can continue that conversation. Yeah, absolutely. I met with 2 folks down at the QE. Yeah. Okay, well, we should have another discussion.
We should.
Yeah, for sure. So by development agreement, in this institutional zone, we proposed that a subsidized or affordable housing project that was owned by a non-government body or a not-for-profit group could be done. So normally residential uses wouldn't be allowed institutional zone, but we wanted to have a zone that was essentially ready to go, that we could look at housing projects when and if something came along that was a good opportunity. There's some funding that's becoming available, and so we just kind of want to be ready for that if a good opportunity.
And where would that be?
So the institutional zone could theoretically could be applied anywhere in the village area. So if it's, I can show you the map of where it is currently. So
It's the gray.
it's the gray, yeah. But if it was, if it was needed or wanted for a new lot, there would be a process to go through a rezoning that would involve public meetings, and then if the rezoning was approved, it would then go through the development agreement process for the actual building itself for the project. Yeah. Go to the institutional. So parks and open space. It's a fairly straightforward zone. Public parks, community development, community gardens permitted by right. Private parks by development agreement. This is something we there's a private park could be a whole bunch of different things. Some of them could be very benevolent and beneficial, and others could range into things that try to be efficient or have different requirements like that. So what we wanted to do was ensure that that would go through development agreement, because not that it's likely thing, but that would keep the zone where it would be appropriate, but it would require that community consultation and council oversight, because it could range. This kind of was spurred on, I'm not sure that you're familiar with the local proposals to develop a park on Sherwood Lake several years ago. So the district of Lunenburg purchased a property in Chester and was proposing to develop a waterfront park there. And it created some tension, and eventually there was a memorandum of understanding. But because of that, we brought in some new regulations so that parks that are owned by us need to go through a pretty stringent process. Final zone, I'll take just a couple minutes to talk about this one. It's the ocean infill zone. So this is not an exact replacement, but we currently have something called the water access zone. It's an interesting zone. It's a little tricky to administer. Typically, our municipal authority ends at the ordinary high water mark. The water access zone actually goes out into the water to try to control things like wharves and infilling. And we currently have regulations on infilling and say you're supposed to come in for approval for that. If you don't, then technically you're in violation of building bylaw, and that's something that we should enforce. And frankly, that's very tricky to not just enforce, but even know when it occurs. If somebody goes and has some work on weekends or something like that, and you don't call or don't see it, that can happen. Additionally, when you're doing infill, you're supposed to get approval from Department of Natural Resources through the province. And so there's been instances where sometimes people get approval from them and they think they're good to go, and they don't realize they need to come to us as well. So, and then the other piece to this is when we do find violation, the land use bylaw isn't set up to do ticketing or issue tickets. Basically, our options are work with the owner to get them into compliance, and if they refuse, we have to take to court, which is expensive and costly and time consuming for everybody. So all that to say, we have this water access zone, and it was well intentioned. I just don't think it was working the way it was, and it hasn't prevented infill. We have several examples where infill has happened, and we will likely ultimately have to go back after most people that to remove it or eventually take court action. So this is a different attempt to try to disincentivize infill, I guess the way I would put it. So the ocean infill zone, it will not show up on the zoning map like today. You won't see it on as a color on the existing map. But basically what will happen is the day that the new bylaw gets approved, we'll take a snapshot of the coastline of the ordinary high water mark around Chester. And anything beyond that, any land that's created beyond that will automatically, whenever you did make a change to the plan, we apply, have this ocean infill zone applied to it. And in the zone, in the ocean infill zone, the only thing you can know is the more personal way. And we also have this additional bit of language that we'll add in to basically say, let's say, we tried to think of all the reasons somebody would infill and then do anything we could to prevent that. We can't do everything, we have a limited amount of authority. But one of them was, well, if somebody infilled 10 feet out, they might ask, well, can I move my building 10 feet closer? Because the setbacks, theoretically, there's now 10 more feet of land. We'll have language in there to say that any ocean infill zone doesn't count towards your setbacks. So that would, again, disincentivize it. So basically, if you do infill, you'd be able to put a wharf on it, you'd be able to put some lawn chairs on it, plant flowers on it. Those are all things that fall outside of the land use bylaw that don't require permits, but you wouldn't be able to build any structures on it, and it wouldn't advantage how you could put the house on the lot. So that's the attempt. I think that will hopefully work relatively well. And then the other piece to this is it gets us out of that quasi jurisdictional issue, which really isn't ours. It says beyond the high water mark, that's the province, and it's up to them to issue permits and do their own enforcement. So I know that was long. Thank you all for sticking with me. So yeah, like I said, happy to take questions and comments now. And also, if people would stick around, we can definitely do one-on-ones. We have some other staff who can probably speak to some of this stuff as well. We're involved with this. And just quickly to talk about where we go from here. So we are now July 26th. So we're originally in the middle of our 3 planned meetings, but because of the weather on Saturday, we decided to do a 4th one. So we have an additional session now on August 5th, 10:30 a.m. in this room. All the sessions are held here. So once we have all of those sessions, we're going to take all the comments and questions that we heard back and prepare what we heard, report that on back to council and say these are the issues and the categories that we're identifying. And we'll propose here's some options. We want to change this way, get this way, get rid of this, that kind of thing. We'll work through that with council, and that will basically lead us to a final draft of the documents. We're hoping for October, and then if all goes well, we'll move through public hearing and the formal adoption process in November, and hopefully have the documents in fact by the end of the year. So I know that's a lot. The other thing I will say to you, if somebody doesn't want to verbally state their question, we do have comment cards back next to the copy there, and you can take them home and drop them off, or you can move them here and stay at home. Yes.
So what I heard, 2 categories: housekeeping, and some of it looks very good, and spur development, infill, changing zone, etc., etc. So I live on the last block on Prince, Robert McLeod, my way man. So half a dozen houses on our street I would say we could have 4 granny suites, maybe 3. Another property at the end of the street, we probably have 2 duplexes. So say 5 or 6 new units. And we're 2 blocks away from the 31-room hotel. So the elephant in the room is, where the hell's the water come from? And where's the sewer go? And who is going to enforce this? Because what we see with enforcement is, and of course, history, the best indicator of future performance, that's mistakes made. So I know it's not up to you to answer this, and you're a smart man, but at some point, somebody in this government has to answer these questions.
Fair. And you're right, I'm not gonna be able to speak a whole lot to them, but I'll take a crack at it. So, I mean, the water issue, it's cyclical. And it's not, right now, we're not at the bottom of the cycle. It's on Councillor Wells' mind. And I believe there are some test wells that are working. I don't have there's not a council director, they haven't approved any projects, but all I can say is it's still being discussed, and when new infrastructure is being looked at, that's definitely part of the discussion too. So that's not a satisfactory answer, but that's what I'm hearing, is that it's not it's not completely no. Originally, after the wasn't the plebiscite, but the vote, it was no, we're not doing anything. That's again changed, that language and that discussion has changed again. So it's starting to come back, and they're like, we understand there's a need for water, but that's about where it is right now from what I.
Shouldn't we be on hold until we figure the water and sewer out?
So I think that's a valid question too. If we had more information or if we had water, I think there would be some more radical changes proposed in here. So in my mind, I would love it if we had water too. Like it would make a lot of these discussions more easily. And it is, and I acknowledge it's a piece that's lacking out of this whole discussion about it's a major piece, absolutely, yes. And for those folks who are impacted or who are concerned that they will be impacted, it's water is, you gotta have it. So what without being the one who says what gets spent and what doesn't, what I've tried to do is take, I would call it, we can disagree, a prudent approach to gradually increasing density. This and the tricky part about this is when we change the rules, it doesn't force a change, but it allows a change. And how much uptake you get is hard to gauge. So to your point, we have 5 more, or how long will it take to get to 5? We don't admittedly, those are tough. So I would hope that the changes here are gradual, but that may not,
There's no shortage of developers and promoters, right? But there's a shortage of water, sewer capacity, and enforcement.
Absolutely.
sewer is being so there is an $8 million expansion coming to the sewer plant, and that will give us additional capacity. So on that side, we are good. We are good for sewer. The water piece is the place that admittedly the big hole in this, and something that I'm just not able to speak to in an informed way, because it's
But we want you to know, pass on, there is a real concern. I bet if you ask people here if they're concerned about water,
Yes.
there's our hand. You need to.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. We've recovered. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, and I don't want to speak for him, but the other point that Councillor Wells did make on Saturday, because this issue came up, understandably, was that when that vote was taken, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, 43-50, like it was there key hears from a lot of people that are concerned about paying for it as well. So that again,
But there was a mechanism, and there was no leadership. We went and spoke at council meeting about somebody did, there were 4 or 5 questions going on around the village. And they had held a public meeting and answered those questions. It was a much closer. I think it was 47-54 or something like that. It was a very close vote, because there was no leadership on it, no communication at all. to answer those questions so that people could move ahead and learn that the government offered an 85%, they were going to give you the 85% to go ahead on this stuff. And that there was a mechanism that you couldn't afford it, just like if you have your difficulty with your taxes, there's a process at the municipality where you go and get some sort of relief, and they were going to offer that, but they didn't publicize that. They continued to scare you with the theory that they were going to be socked with a huge bill. It was really a terrible campaign. No campaign.
And it's not gonna get cheaper.
No.
It's never gonna get cheaper.
But the other point, that was all done before you're proposing this increased density within the village. That was before a 31-room hotel is going to be put in.
Well, okay, it's a 31-room hotel, a possible 10 units further down on Valley Road, a change to the rope lot area, could be more residential, could be more units there, plus the restaurant. There is possible duplexes on Union Street. There is the institutional thing that you talked about that could very well be where the fire department is now, because if the fire department moves, that could be another development right there. There's the Hubble property. I was at a meeting in August at the Legion last year, and you were running out of time, and Councillor Wells asked that you move ahead to the slide about the Hubble property. So you did, which talked about a couple of apartment buildings that could go in there. I think 2 8 units, 1 6 unit, 1 4 unit, that type of thing. Last week here on Saturday, Councillor Wells said, I put myself forward for this position to get this document through. So is he representing us or is he representing developers? That's my question, really, because that's a lot. That's not gentle density. No.
Yeah.
It is not.
May I go back to the water for a moment? From a geological perspective, time is of the essence here, because as the population we have and others, just as we grow, and I'm certainly not against growth, development, or progress, but as we take the water from the water table, the weight of the infrastructure suppresses the water structure. So we'll just say that the water table went down 2 feet. This year, it perhaps because of the weight of the
Structure.
thank you, will come down 2 inches. So next year, as the water table fills again, it can't fill to 100% capacity. We're missing 2 inches of that, which is millions of gallons of water. So then the next year, the weight of the infrastructure pushes down again. So what we're doing is we're collapsing that water table, and it will never.
Yeah, and again, this is just me speaking here, but another thing that I think, aside from water, that would be very helpful would be a detailed aquifer study. So we would actually know, because I know from hearing it, so 2 people will be fine and the neighbor goes dry or vice versa. And some of that you can figure out by looking at topography, and then some of it is a bit of a mystery because you don't see underground. And again, that would be, I think, potentially something else. Because at least if we had that, we could say, okay, this is where we really want to lock things down because we've got a problem. And over here, if that's what it showed us, I'm not saying it would, but do you know what I mean? If we had some sort of almost a heat map to say this is where there actually is water or where
We already know that. We already know which homes down Hubble Street.
we know which ones have. Oh,
We're planning on putting building right around those areas.
But what we don't know is how all the underground systems connect, and I'm not a geologist, but it's very complicated. There's underground rivers and there's different aquifers. Oh yeah, no, I'm not.
It might be complicated, but we're just normal people, we're not scientists. We just we know there's no water. It's like
And it's-
common sense.
And this, I mean, and I know you're all acknowledging this, and I appreciate the nature of this discussion, because it's not always this, and I appreciate, but it is out of my hands. It is frankly up to council. They're the ones with the first strings. And to be honest with you, Councillor Wells is a strong advocate. He's up against 6 other councillors that represent their own districts that may or may not want to support that kind of development. So,
But that's why we're bringing this up. So you said our voices would be recorded.
yeah, absolutely.
So all the councillors can listen to
Yeah,
this.
oh yes, absolutely. And they are, and I know many of them are.
Sitting on my front porch watching the Playhouse burn was not something that instilled a great deal of confidence that, yes, I have water. My husband and I have lots of water. but our neighbors do not. And so it doesn't matter how much water is in our well. When the house next to us burns, we're next. We know that.
And the other thing is, a lot of these developers and that, you said as long as they can afford to get these studies done that say they can do this. Well, we know money can buy just about anything and not necessarily come up with what is actually happening. And along with that goes, if you're going to go by these studies that these developers pay for, who is ultimately responsible for when the thing collapses? Like if this big hotel goes in there, there's going to be a major drain on water. There's going to be a major drain on sewer, and it's fine to have your studies, but we all know there's a problem, but we don't. But common sense doesn't seem to be anything that anybody listens to anymore. All over the world, you hear every day, oh, we're meeting all the rules. We're meeting all the rules. The trouble is, most of the rules are put together by companies who pay for people to make up studies that they want to hear.
Well, we rely on professional associations, stamps and certifications, and that is where the liability would sit. If an engineer sends a report, stamps it as a certified engineer, and there's an error like that, he's got liability insurance. That frankly, and if you don't trust professionals that fair enough, then we should write into our rules that that's not acceptable to go by a professional study. That's the answer.
Something more needs to be done about this hotel thing, because once it's done and everything starts collapsing.
It is done, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because it's been in.
We're gonna end up paying a lot more money in the courts once everybody starts losing their water and starts suing everybody. Than it would be to maybe buy these guys out and get rid of them before it happens.
Well, that's being recorded. That's all I can say about
Gareth, I
that.
noticed.
Sorry, we've got a couple of things to get, so.
First of all, I think you really did a good job on a lot of it. There are a couple of things that I think we ought to consider adding to it. One is that around the Old Stone Bridge, I think we ought to talk about it being an environmentally sensitive area and a protected wet zone that goes behind it, because previously they tried to build call it a dock, but what it was, they were extending their front yard, a dock's width, but covering the entrance to get back to the wetland where all these infant baby sea creatures grow and the access to Stamford Lake. So I think it ought to be considered, put some wording in there about environmentally sensitive and protecting that entrance back to Stamford Lake, which doesn't come through. The other thing is, all the way through this, you talk about a mix of housing and changing things. And on the other hand, you talk about encouraging suitable development patterns that complement existing structures. And I think that, for instance, putting an institutional building in the middle of a residential area might not be complementary to that area. And you ought to have some commentary that talks about where I think we need low-income housing, but where would it be most appropriate rather than sticking in someplace in the middle. The other thing is you talk about protecting the character of an area, and right now you group what you call it, the core area and the peninsula areas, but they are R1 and R2, and I think they need to be separated. R1 is very different, and some of your setbacks for the property lines are geared very nicely for R2, but we're reducing our setback in R1 from 25 feet to 5 feet is not appropriate, is not consistent with the quality of that area and the character of that area. So I really think that needs to be separated out. And I really am against the whole thing you're doing in the R1s by saying going from what 4,000 square feet to 1,000. I think that's way too drastic a change. Nothing else has changed that drastically. And that if you're moderating things, then it ought to be a stepwise fashion, and that you need to keep your green space there. Those areas are known for their green space and the quality of that area. And I just am totally against reductions and increased density of that area.
No, thank you.
Just a point of clarification. You have exceptions for larger developments that would have off-site parking. What's to prevent people from buying these houses, turning them down and creating off-site parking? I mean, you're in essence, a lot of these plans are encouraging these smaller lots, these smaller things. Rather accelerated development.
Yes.
What's going to stop people from buying houses, tearing them down and saying, oh, that's my off-street parking for my 50-unit motel?
There's nothing that would prevent somebody from tearing down a building, a commercial parking lot. I should check on that. But I would think currently it would be like it's there's nothing currently, it's similar. Currently, the commercial parking lots are permitted in that zone. In the central commercial zone. So and we also already allow offsite parking. So like I don't think we're changing anything there, but if that's something that you think is a risk that will happen and we continue to allow it, then that's a fair comment. Yeah.
But I think that's an equitable plan.
Okay. Yeah.
When you made reference to, I think it was in R4, that there would be the on-site parking would have to be at the rear or the sides or whatever, and there'd have to be soft beautification so the views would be lovely. But what's the case for the hotel? You're going to come in off Valley Road, and where's the parking to be located?
So the hotel is already approved.
I know.
We all know, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's these regulations are in place yet, but so there, to answer your question, if there's nothing in the core commercial zone about the side or rear because there is no requirement. We could do that.
But when the medical center and all that stuff was built up on the highway, I thought there was discussion about that highway, that everything, the parking had to be done differently. And the Valley Road, none of that kind of stuff, that commercial didn't come into play then?
Correct, yeah. So that was, so like I mentioned, I didn't get into it much, but there was currently along Highway 3, it's called Highway 3 Streetscape area. In 2011, there was a series of meetings that were done, and they brought in this, it's still part of the secondary planning side, new regulations just for area, and that had all of this site plan criteria that I said we're going to work through. So basically, since 2011, that was when the change came in, so that was applied on the highway, but not to the commercial zone in the village here.
One more thing about the hotel. I'm sorry. In your document that you have now, the secondary planning strategy, land use bylaw, there was an amendment made to that February the 2nd, 2022. And it says amendment to permit residential structures containing 5 to 10 dwelling units by development agreement.
Yes.
Okay, so that was February 22nd. You looked at possible development agreements having to go in place for units 5 to 10 dwellings. But yet the hotel did not have their development permit approved until April 10th,
Yeah.
2022.
So we had a specific ask for the property at 122 Queen Street, for anyone that's familiar with the multi-tenant building. I'm sure that
Yeah.
there's an existing tenant building
Yeah.
on Street 122. So the owner of that property, currently that building is not conforming or grandfathered. Up until the time we made that change, you couldn't build a tenant anywhere, it was pre-existing, and it was pre-existing as non-residential, 1 commercial unit, and the developer wanted to change that 10th unit over to residential. And there was no way under the current, he was locked in under the current, and he couldn't do that. And so what he opted to do was ask council to open up any property in that zone to 10 units by development agreement. And it's the difference there is it's residential units where the house is the commercial use. So that's why it was a specific ask to do a specific thing.
But they're both commercial properties
They're both in the commercial zone.
in the commercial
Yeah,
zone.
yeah.
But it is a commercial property, the one that's for 10 units.
It's zoned commercial, but it's residential use. Well, there's 1 unit in there that has to be commercial. Yeah. So
One of the biggest developments that has gone on in this community since Millennium Drive is this hotel.
Yes.
And yet no public input, no council, no anything, no consideration to neighbors or anything in that regard.
And that's because, and I know you know this, for 30 years, the land use bylaw has allowed those by development permit. And when the 2004 plan was approved, Millennium Drive, if you talk to people at the time, I talked to someone now, was the worst thing that was going to happen in this village. And now it's, and it went through a development agreement.
They had to do a lot of stuff for
Yeah.
water over there.
But it went through the development agreement.
Yeah.
The community in 2004 told the planners at the time, told council at the time, we don't trust you. We don't trust development agreements. We don't want them. We want everything to be simple. We want everything to be listed as development permit so that we know, imagine that, so that we know what can go everywhere. And now it surprised everybody.
Well, I just found it astonishing that in February, you make an amendment to your strategic plan of a property that is just down the road from there, and nobody thought, oh gosh, like we have an application put in right now for a 31-room hotel by permit, and yet we're not clearing any of this before it gets approved.
Also, once an application is made, we can't change the rules for that. So if you're saying the application is in the time that change was made,
It was in.
it wouldn't have been, it would, even if we had said new hotels by development agreement, it wouldn't have affected that problem.
So
Once you're in, you're in.
there's absolutely not one thing under the law that as this community can do to do anything to make that developer responsible for anything that happens into our
So
property.
I'm not a lawyer.
No.
But I would say there is nothing that the municipality can do to stop that development from going ahead, assuming that they meet building code and they get their building permit. They've got their building permit.
So as a developer, I might just speak this a little more clearly, as I am the one that signed that first. So just to clarify, the amendment that we did related to King Street
Mhm.
is about housing. It's about apartments. It's not about the buildings. They're completely different. They're the same zones, but different use. It's like saying a gas station and a bookstore.
Mhm.
So that's why that amendment had no impact.
And it also wasn't just, it wasn't about undertaking a review of the zone and looking at every single use and how it all works. It was, somebody asked us, so we were in the process of doing plan review, and we were asked to do an amendment to the current document. So it was like we were focused on that item.
But there's one water tank.
Yeah. The water is critically important. Everyone in the room, we all agree with that. Absolutely.
So why would something like the water not come into? Because somebody who lives here, I shiver washing my hair because I turn off the water, shampoo my hair, and then when I'm ready, I turn the water back on. I can pretty well guarantee that the people in the rooms down the street a little bit are not going to be turning off the water to protect my neighbor's water.
Whether it's commercial or it's residential,
It's
they're
irrelevant.
all using water.
So to all of that point, that's why we're here. That's why Garth's been working like crazy for months to get you guys a plan. What we're hearing, what at least what I am hearing, is that you would like more consideration for water, hydrology reports, that kind of stuff in your land use bylaw. You do not have that today. For over 30 years, this is a community, didn't ask for that. Or if it didn't get through, I wasn't here. What was approved as a community plan was, as staff, whether we agree with you or not, because I don't disagree, water is critically important. Garth agrees, it's water critically important. We can't impose that as an additional requirement under a legislative document that doesn't require it now. What we want to do is hear your comments about what do you want to do going forward.
I think what you're hearing is panic.
And that's fair, right? It's an unknown. You're right. It's a big development, it's a big village.
But we have natural resources in the province. We have a federal government that does environmental assessments and geological surveys. And, you know, I can probably in 2 hours find a good aquifer map of this province, but I'm not doing that because that's not my job. But, and I know it'll be ignored like other things that I've suggested over the last 7 years, but there's no reason why the other levels of government have not been spoken to or contacted to contribute to things that will make this plan, make us say, yes, our planning department did the absolute best they could. Sure, I'm not gonna like everything, or maybe I love everything, but that's irrelevant. As long as things are right, then everybody's either happy or pissed off. This isn't right for the water in this village to shut us all down after it laid out in 1760 that we're so also proud to look at. It's just, it's incomplete is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
As an ex-contractor, when we were building houses and had to get permits, we always had to have the proper setbacks for water and wells and make sure that there was water and sewage and all this, and that it was sufficient for the property that we were dealing with. When we were dealing with this permit over here for the hotel, was there no plan submitted for water? And then sustainability and all that.
There's no.
As part of the permit, you shouldn't be able to get a permit unless you have these things.
So that's the good feedback that we hear.
Exactly.
That's
So right now,
documents that the community whatever you want to say, didn't for years didn't require those things. Yeah, when the top that
They always required them when you're basically when you were building a house.
so
so that's under the building code is probably.
if what you may be referencing is Nova Scotia environmental on-site septics in the wells, and there are requirements at the provincial level. Completely out of our scope, we do not have authority or power to deal with it, or if you're gonna install a septic system. There's absolutely a process that you have to be so far away from the water source, and you have to be so far away from body wells. There's details around that. And you do need approval for that before you get your building permit.
That's assuming you're going to install something like that, but apparently they didn't even have to prove that they were even going to install it.
That's not accurate.
So I have a, but the sewer, apparently they don't have a sewer, do they?
So
But they're
that's
gonna-
not accurate. The connects. So they have their municipal sewer permit to connect to our municipal system. It has been reviewed by our public works department, which includes our municipal engineer and everybody that deals with our sewer system. They have that. They needed that before they could get the building permit. The building permit specifically deals with building code regulations. They do not go into the scope of that. They have received that, which means our building inspector has reviewed the plan and have deemed them to meet the minimum building code requirements for this province. So we use the national building code as well as some additional provincial regulations on top of that. The development permit that they received at the municipal side is solely related to the land use bylaw. Land use bylaw is 19 years old, and that is why we're dying to get something new, because these things are coming up. Because there are concerns that are not addressed in your current document. That's why they're fine. That's why we're here. We want to hear all of this,
So
and we really, really appreciate if you are giving this feedback. Because it is.
who was it that was responsible for giving the permission to pay the water and that's something.
So they're connected to our municipal system. So it would be our municipality, we've approved their connection to attach to our system. So essentially their waste flow will come to our system and go to our Chester plant, which, as Garth has mentioned, is already approved. They're just deciding which way they want to go to expand.
Wait, so much.
I have a suggestion. Sorry, in back first.
Just no question. If this plan had been in place,
Yes,
would the hotel have been able to receive?
it would go through, no, sorry, just don't let me finish, please. It would go, so all tourist accommodations, this hotel be at the end of the development agreement going forward. So would it be approved? I can't say yes or no. It could have been approved, but it would have gone through a public process. It would have had a 4 public meetings, there would have been time for this exact kind of input, and I apologize. Council could have requested studies like well tests and other types of tests from the developer, believe them, as to what the types of water was there. So that would be how it would go. And that is, just to be clear, that is what we have in all of the zones going forward. Any hotels would go through development. So at this point, we can't go back and undo it, but what we can do is change it going forward. So, yes, so here.
Okay, so, so clearly, Heather and Garth, you know, you guys know that we're all freaked out about water. There are other communities in the world that have been facing water shortages for a really long time. I also realize that until the councilors themselves bring this topic back into their hot agenda, that nothing's going to change quickly. But maybe what we can do is put some guidelines into development requirements about water saving measures, toilets, toilet gray water systems, recycling water. Maybe in the short term, what we can do with this plan is to instill some requirements for larger development projects to be as water efficient, water conservative, water recycling as people in California and all sorts of other places that have been dealing with water shortages forever. If we start behaving like we have a water shortage, as we do, then maybe at this level, we could put some of those requirements in while we wait for the politicians to address this issue, because that's 10 years away. Basically, a solution to that problem is easily 10 years away. But if we could put some language in there, then, maybe if the hotel's permit had been granted and it required them to do some recycling, green stuff around water conservation, we might feel better.
That's a great suggestion. And that's something we can
Do that.
very easily
Yeah.
incorporate.
Going forward.
Whether it's been in standards, bylaw, there are paths to do something.
Yeah.
Yes, I just have a question about the approval for the hookup to the municipal sewage system for the hotel.
Okay.
Was that contingent on the municipality's having its capacity?
No, they've approved it now. So in theory, if a magical wand, whether it's a horrible wand or a great wand, and a hotel was built today, they'd be allowed to connect to the system today. But that is what they review about. Our system and our capacity today, can we handle this hotel? And our staff, who are professionals in that field, and know that system inside and out, that's all they do. We've got staff, they don't do anything else, but that's your system. They live and breathe, and they work 7 days a week. This rain, they were all here. And they know that. So they have said, as of right now, we can handle that capacity. There is also been comments that say, we can't handle 5 more of these without doing something with our system. Right? So that is at that point where this is why council has approved funding to start expanding and replacing whatever direction they go to be able to handle more in the system. Because it is, we don't have infinite ability.
And that's actually my question. We've allocated $8 million. Is that maintenance? Is that a 25% larger capacity? Because with water comes sewage. So with the water, it shouldn't come with sewage. It should. So the $8 million gets us what?
I believe it's 500 units. I'm not sure exactly, but we
If you have no water, you don't actually need sewage, do you? I mean, maybe it can support it at the moment, because there isn't going to be any water to go down the system.
Well, if it's never been considered, it seems to me that some of the commercial businesses start the most with water shortage. It's never been any consideration made as like phase one line down Valley Road and do all the commercial properties.
Yes. There was a look at doing the T also called.
Yeah, it would be interesting from a safety perspective.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm saying, they did that, they should put a few fire hydrants in too.
But in this new document, it states that there is no consideration for water at this point in time in this document.
Right, that's right, because that is the latest from council. Now, I think what we're hearing, I think there is some room to expand, like the comment about, additional criteria on water saving measures going on, that's something we look at. I also think that it doesn't have a whole lot of oomph behind it, but there's some other stuff that's come up that's identified in the secondary plan as it's called future projects. And I know water shouldn't be a future project, but so things like this is probably a trivial comparison, but there's been discussion about things like a tree bylaw, like the trees that have significant importance in the village, and a number of other initiatives like that have been identified as future projects. So I think definitely water needs to be on there as at the very least as a continuation of discussion. It's happening, right? So I will go back and do that, but yes, that language in this is accurate based on this I've heard, which is that there's no current. Yeah, so
Everyone's probably pretty tired, but I just want to bring up another issue. I'm very concerned about this. I live quite close to the proposed hotel. But I'm also concerned about the Back Harbor Road and the fact that permission is given for a 3-story structure to be built on the non-water side.
Back Harbor Road, you mean
Walker
Road?
Yeah. So we did do a variance for setbacks for that one. We have not issued a development permit yet. Because one of the conditions on that is that they actually have some kind of engineering because of the hill that's there. So they do not have a building permit. They do not have a development permit for that yet. They've got to the initial stage. If they can meet all the technical requirements, it would be allowed them to go into the investment. Because that oddly is a tiny property, it's from state residential.
And my concern, I mean, I don't know if you've walked along the road recently since Saturday. No one in their right mind would want to build something because the entire hills,
If that may very well change the owner's mind and say, you haven't seen what has happened, and the fact that everybody from all governments and everywhere is talking about, these aren't 100 storms anymore.
But I would love to see something in the bylaws just saying, no one can build anything on that side of the road, because I mean, the traffic on the back road looks crazy anyway. And environmentally, to gouge up the side of the hill and to build something in, I mean, there's that kind of Disneyland, new parking place that was big looking. I hope no one here is.
Heather, in regards to the hotel, 3 stories, how is that happening without fire suppression system? Do they have to have all the fire retardant materials that go into that? Does that mean that siding is a potential thing for that? Because that would be considered more fire retardant?
Right, so all your questions, I can't, at this spectrum question, but I'm not. What I can say, they're building inspector, you guys probably don't know him, friends, he's lived here forever, he probably knows there's no money. About the fishing stories. He is incredibly experienced. So he went through that against his own getting fired. If there's any needed, I don't even want to have a big ask. That might give you one. To answer that question, I would say check in with us in the event, or maybe I can go to.
Okay. And when you said for 30 years that piece of property has been zoned that way, when it came across your desk that it's going to be a 31-room hotel, do you think anybody in this community ever thought that would happen? I mean, there was 4, maybe 3 apartments, maybe 4 apartments in there.
Yeah. There's a speculation. So some of the strategy right now that we have policies talk on the record from longer. That the goal was to actually grow out Valley Road. And so it's not really happened, and this big one kind of be the first step. Change.
The other piece to that is it's not just that property, like it's any property in that zone. So it wasn't like that. You might remember a few years ago, there was the rezoning on Duke Street, and there was a hotel proposed to go there.
Yeah. Which looked lovely.
Right, but, and I'm not saying I'm like, it's not a plain thing, but what I'm saying is same zone, right? So hotels allowed there.
It was what, maybe 12 rooms, if that max?
Right, yeah, and that was, yeah, yes, but so in terms of that property, that it wasn't, it's not specific to that property, that was, and I mean. Frankly, there could have been 7 hotels host on that stretch, you know, like, theoretically.
That rezoning, I know they're kind of preliminary theoretical sketches around. They could be. What we have under current hotel development permit setbacks use. Parking is usually right now, for commercial uses, the biggest thing that we're utilizing to control. Right, so small lots, we need so much parking, we don't have space for it. But that comes with problems, Garth identified. And day one, I've been here almost 10 years, from day one, I heard we do not want to be ones. I'm a valley girl, so I get it, I know exactly what we might look like. That's wrong, all that parking. Right, so that's what we're trying to do, is find that balance. You don't get parking lots everywhere, you don't get cement and just hardscaping, because that's not what it's like. We are trying to help preserve that. But how do you still stay vibrant and alive?
Well, I'm going to read a statement that's in your current document. It says the challenge faced by the Chester Municipal Council is to provide for steady residential and commercial growth without compromising unique character and appreciate the village, appreciate what the lifestyle that the people in this village have become accustomed to. It also goes on to say that the intention of this policy direction is to maintain existing character, protect property values, and protect water supply in the established residential areas. What has changed from then to now?
Well, that's not a residential area. It is.
Well, I live there and I live
And that's part of the hub, right? We have residential, people homes, people there, longer community numbers up against a commercial zone. So there's that lot for in between the friction. And it may not, so generally it's way before Garth in my time, unfortunately. Maybe that should never have been that, we don't know. We weren't there when the community plan was coming out and the conversations were happening. To say, why did it stay? Why did it stay again in 2004? Like we've gone through 2, if not 3 revisions of the land use bylaw. And if you ever look at our land use bylaw, it's all the up, they amendments to what we've done in the last 19 years. Why was that never discussed? I genuinely don't know. It's not something that Garth and I are probably.
No, I realize that, but it is a statement that was in your that is currently in your document that states that these are important things to the council. But yet there are all these people here that we feel that our view and our opinion and our property value and our water has not been taken into consideration.
It's just a very fair comment.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming and sticking with it. I know there's a lot here and a lot of other things that were discussed. Like we said, we got it all recorded, so that is great. And any comments will go on record and we'll go back. Again, we do have comment cards if you want to that way. And you're of course welcome to come to the August 3rd and August 5th sessions if you like. The other thing, it came up on Saturday, exactly the same way today, was part of when we kind of got off on these related but not exactly the issues. A couple of comments were made. I thought it was pretty interesting that, well, this is kind of the only chance we've had to express it, and somebody will probably hear and read those comments. And I thought that was really kind of eye-opening to me as somebody who just thinks in the planning world. So I would say, and this is always available, but I would just pop this. The council meetings every Thursday, now we're not going to meet in August, they are meeting tomorrow. They have a 15-minute public session every meeting. And you can't sign up, you don't have to, you could just show up at 8:45 on Thursday morning and they do a call for in public. So
and if you can't show up, you can submit an email to me that can be read. So if you're working or anything.
so just like that there every week or every other week. So like I'm not trying to push you off. I want everyone to come to these two, just for those other items that I just want to. That is available and in a way that you can have your voice heard if like we heard on Saturday, there may be some more public meetings to get to some of these issues. But anyway, thank you all for coming. You will stick around if you want to chat and yeah, please reach out with any more questions or comments.